Let the record reflect. Case file 9 secured the data. Case file 10 sealed the room. Case file 11 begins when the room can no longer contain the damage. The structure is no longer private. The perimeter is leaking. The old methods of personal friction are failing. In a closed system, the aggressor is the architect. In an exposed system, the aggressor is the specimen. The deeper problem is this. Exposure is the transition from conflict to case study, not exposure as a social media blast, exposure as a loss of the benefit of a doubt, exposure as the moment the misunderstanding is revealed to be a product line. The system can survive a villain arch. It cannot survive a predictable one. What it cannot survive clearly is cross-referencing. It cannot survive a file that allows third parties to predict the system's next move before it makes it. It cannot survive a room where sequence begins to matter more than charisma. It cannot survive a witness who no longer reacts to tone but tracks patterns. The first stage of control required privacy. The second stage required confusion. The third stage required plausible deniability. Case file 11 opens at the moment all three begin to fail at once. Opening case file 11, the exposure problem.
The collapse of the interpretive monopoly.
The system's greatest asset is not charm. It's not seduction. It's not even fear. It is its monopoly on the why. In the fog of a private relationship, the system tells everyone why things happen. It provides the subtitles for the silence. It provides the translation for your instability. It dictates the emotional temperature of the room. It decides what counts as context and what counts as overreaction. It decides who gets framed as reasonable and who gets framed as difficult. That monopoly is the real engine. Exposure is the breaking of that monopoly. It is the moment the atmospheric fog clears and reveals the machinery. This happens when the system's behavior stops looking like a response to you and starts looking like a response to its own needs. When the complicated history starts looking like standard operating procedure. When the private pain starts looking like a control toggle. When the outbursts start looking like a calculated reaction. When the concern starts sounding less like care and more like management. When the misunderstanding starts repeating with unnatural consistency across different rooms. That is the rupture. That is the first leak. The mask is not a face. The mask is a user interface. Its purpose was never to reveal the self. Its purpose was to manage the audience. The moment the interfere glitches in front of a witness, the user experiences changes for everyone. What used to feel personal begins to feel procedural. What used to feel emotional begins to feel engineered. What used to feel like bad luck begins to feel like design. The system is not afraid you will tell the truth. It is afraid the truth will stop needing you to tell it. Once the pattern is open source, the system can no longer claim that you are a variable causing the problem. You are just the latest person to encounter the mask. That is the collapse of an interpretive monopoly. The room is no longer renting its meaning from the aggressor.
Evacuate the building now! The structure is compromised! Everyone out!
The burn rate of credibility, the reputation laundry.
Credibility is the currency the system uses to buy its way out of consequences. A manipulative system treats people as credible reservoirs. It drains their social standing to refill its own image. It launders itself through association. It moves through trusted language, trusted faces, trusted institutions, trusted roles. It survives by attaching to whatever the room still believes in. Exposure is a bank run. Once the pattern is legible, the exchange rate for the system lies collapses. In the past, the system could trade a small apology for a massive amount of unearned trust. Now, the market has corrected. Every "I'm sorry" costs more. It requires actual change, which the system cannot provide. Every "that's not what happened" requires more proof. Third parties begin asking for receipts. Every "you're overreacting" yields less control. The audience starts looking at the system's reaction instead. Every "I was only trying to help" has to survive timeline review. Every "I didn't mean it like that" has to survive repetition analysis. Every "you misunderstood me" has to survive pattern recognition. That is expensive. The system now has narrative debt. Every previous lie has to be serviced. Every version has to be maintained. Every contradiction needs a patch. Every patch creates another seam. Every seam becomes another point of structural weakness. That is why the system becomes frantic. It is running out of uncontaminated witnesses. It is running out of rooms where the old pricing still works. It is forced to move into new markets, new people, new rooms, new victims, because the current room has become forensically aware. It is protecting its market share of trust, and the market is crashing because the product is defective. This is not a moral crisis for the system. It is a liquidity crisis. The image can no longer generate enough belief to cover the liabilities underneath it.
The failed cleanup, image repair under forensic conditions.
Once exposure begins, the system does not sit still. It initiates cleanup. That is standard procedure. A softer tone appears. A carefully timed apology surfaces. A brief period of humility is performed. Selective vulnerability enters the chat. A story about stress is introduced. A claim of being misunderstood is floated. A strategically incomplete confession may even be offered. Not enough truth to produce accountability, just enough softness to buy interpretative confusion. That is the cleanup cycle. It works in low resolution rooms. It works where memories are weak. It works where sequence is ignored and where tone still outranks pattern. That is the problem. The apology arrives, but the audience notice it only appeared after consequence. The vulnerability appears, but the audience notice it is strangely selective. The gentleness appears, but the audience notices it only surfaces when leverage is lost. The silence appears when the audience notices it feels tactical, not reflective. Outreach appears, the audience notice is calibrated, not relational. What used to function as recovery now function as cooperation. That is the failed cleanup. The repair attempt becomes accidental evidence of design. The rebrand becomes a timeline event. The softness becomes a data point. The pause becomes a maneuver. The room no longer experiences these gestures as healing. It experiences them as containment. That is why the system starts burning energy at an unsustainable rate. It is no longer just maintaining the mask. It is now trying to repair a mask in front of witnesses who have already seen the glue.
The diagnostic smear, administrative character assassination.
When a system knows it's being seen, it stops attacking your actions and starts attacking your signal. It moves from "you did this" to "you are this." That pivot matters. An action can be reviewed. A pattern can be documented. A signal can be contaminated. That is why the system begins a campaign of pathologizing. It does not tell people you're lying. It tells people you are unwell. It does not tell people the evidence is false. It tells people the source is unstable. This is the high-level containment tactic designed to create interpretive drag. Notice the vocabulary of the concerned system. They've had a hard time lately. They've always struggled with reality. I'm worried about their mental state. They take things the wrong way. They get fixated. They've been spiraling. That is not an emotional outburst. That is preemptive sabotage. Its purpose is not emotional expression. Its purpose is evidentiary contamination. The audience is being coached in advance. The witness is being framed before taking the stand. The file is being pre-dismissed before it is even opened. That is the strategy. The goal is to ensure that when you finally present the record, the room has already been vaccinated against your facts. If the system can make you look like a broken instrument, no one would trust the reading you provide, no matter how accurate the math is. Recognize the pivot. The system is no longer defending its own behavior. It is trying to destroy the credibility of the witness before the witness can take stand. That is not a coincidence. That is panic with administrative language.
The weaponization of affiliation, the human shield.
When the internal walls fail, the system looks for external legitimacy. It begins reputation laundering through others. It surrounds itself with innocent shields, people whose integrity is currently unchallenged, people whose presence makes the system look safer than it is. That is not intimacy, it is borrowed innocence. I can't be dangerous. Look who still stands beside me. I can't be deceptive. Look how many people still trust me. I can't be the problem. Look at the caliber of company I keep. That is the shield function. The system places clean people between itself and consequence. It uses affiliation as camouflage. It uses proximity as public relations. It uses the goodwill of others as a protective shell. The strategy has two goals. First, it creates visual legitimacy. Second, it provokes you into attacking the shield instead of tracking the system. That is the trap. If you react to the shield, the system uses that reaction as proof of your aggression. If you try to warn the shield too early, the system reframes you as obsessive, jealous, unstable, or controlling. If you argue with the room before the room has seen enough, the system harvests your urgency as evidence against you. Directive: do not engage the shield. Do not waste clean evidence trying to pry open a closed witness. Do not attack the borrowed credibility directly. Wait for the shield to experience the math. The pattern is universal. The shield is not special. The shield is simply earlier in the timeline. Sooner or later, the shield stops functioning as armor and starts functioning as another witness. That is when affiliation collapses from protection into exposure.
Third-party pattern convergence, the echo effect.
The system's ultimate nightmare is the uncoordinated consensus. This occurs when two people who do not talk to each other notice the exact same glitch in the system's story. This is the exposure problem in its terminal phase. Accusation is he said or she said. Convergence is a fact pattern. Once separate observers arrive at the same conclusion through separate contact, the room changes. That shift does not usually happen all at once. It moves in stages. First comes discomfort. Something feels off, but the witness cannot yet name it. Then comes recognition. A phrase repeats. A contradiction surfaces. A tone shift appears on schedule. Then comes comparison. The witness privately lines up moments that once felt isolated. Now they begin to form a chain. Then comes silent distance. Endorsement slows, confidence softens, automatic defense disappears. The room stops volunteering trust. Then comes convergence. A boss notices the same pivot. A friend notices the same concerned theater. A family member notices the same timeline distortion. A colleague notices the same charm to hostility switch when pressure is applied. No coordination, no campaign, just independent observation arriving at the same conclusion. That is devastating to the system. It can no longer blame the relationship. It can no longer blame your history. It can no longer blame your tone. Now it has to explain the architecture. Architecture is impossible to hide once the lights are on. That is the moment the monster realizes the house is made of glass. Not shattered yet, just transparent enough to destroy deniability.
The power shift, the end of chase.
Exposure does not only destabilize the system, it reorganizes the witness. Earlier in the timeline, truth felt urgent. Not due to weakness, due to environment. In a manipulated room, delay feels dangerous. You think if the truth is not established immediately, it will be buried. You think if the pattern is not named now, the system will rewrite it before the room can retain it. You think if you do not force recognition, distortion will outrun memory and take the lead again. That is how the old environment trained you. To move fast, to explain early, to over-clarify before the room had enough sequence to understand what it was looking at. Case file 11 terminates that chase. Once the record hardens, truth no longer depends on emotional speed. It depends on retained structure. It depends on chronology. It depends on reoccurrence. It depends on the fact that pattern becomes more visible over time, not less. That changes the listener's role. You are no longer trying to force a revelation. You are maintaining a file. You are no longer trying to make every contaminated room agree in real time. You are allowing sequence to outlast performance. You are no longer spending pristine evidence trying to beat distortion in a sprint. You are letting contradiction accumulate until the system begins cross-examining itself. That is a power shift. The system has to remain active to preserve the image. It has to monitor perception, patch inconsistencies, rehearse innocence, adjust tone by audience, revise explanations by room. Stay believable across multiple timelines at once. That is exhausting. And exhaustion creates slippage. Timing errors, overcorrections, incompatible stories in adjacent rooms. Softness that appears only after consequence. Sneers that sound too early. Apologies that arrive too late. Concerns that feels preloaded. Humility that does not survive scrutiny. The system burns energy trying to stay ahead of its own record. The file does not. The file does not panic. It does not overtalk. It does not need the perfect tone. It does not need instant applause. It does not need everyone to wake up at once. It only needs to remain intact long enough for repetition to become undeniable. That is where urgency dies, not into passivity, into confidence, not silence born of intimidation, silence born of evidentiary advantage. You stop acting like the truth is fragile. You stop acting like exposure must be staged by force. You stop confusing motion with power. The system performs. The record remains. And in the long run, what remains always outranks what performs.
The universal victimhood pivot, the exit strategy.
As the floor collapses, the system performs its final maneuver. It detaches from the specific accusation and attaches to global grievance. The world is too sensitive. People are always looking for a villain. Cancel culture is a disease. Nobody understands the burden of my position. Everything gets weaponized now. This pivot matters. A system retreats into abstraction when the specifics are no longer survivable. It stops defending the timeline and starts complaining about the climate. It stops answering the charge and starts indicting the culture. It stops clarifying the facts and starts performing persecution. This is not a philosophical turn. It is an escape hatch. It is the last refuge of a collapsing persona. Specific evidence is dangerous. General grievance is safer. Specific contradiction can be cross-referenced. Universal complaint can be lost in noise. That is why the system moves there. It is trying to disappear its own glitch inside a larger field of static. It is trying to turn exposure into a debate about society. It is trying to convert accountability into oppression. This is not a pivot of strength. It is a confession of exhaustion. The defense has failed. Now, the system wants sympathy without review. It wants abstraction without sequence. It wants to be treated as a symbol so it does not have to survive as a case file.
The verdict: legibility is irreversible.
Let the record reflect. Case file 11 does not document a scandal. It documents a system failure. The aggressor's advantage required 3 conditions: privacy, confusion, deniability. All 3 are degrading. The interpretive monopoly is collapsing. The credibility reserves are burning down. The cleanup cycle is now readable as design. The smear is registering as preemptive contamination. Affiliation is weakening as cover. Independent witnesses are beginning to converge without coordination. That is not rumor. That is adjudication by friction. The structure is becoming too expensive to maintain, too visible to stabilize, too contradictory to scale, too heavy to keep carrying without collapse. Directive: do not rescue the persona from the weight of its own maintenance. Do not donate sequence to rooms still addicted to tone. Do not spend high-grade evidence trying to win low-grade arguments. Do not interrupt the burn rate by reacting to every smear, every shield, every staged softness, every abstract grievance campaign. Hold the file. Protect the chain of custody. Allow the contradictions to remain in circulation long enough to meet each other. That is enough. Because the final exposure is not produced by outrage. It is produced by accumulated incompatibility. The public face can no longer carry the private math. The mask can no longer absorb the weight beneath it. The image can no longer refinance its own lies. Case file 11, the exposure problem. Status: credibility, degradation, active. Deniability, compromise. Structural failure, advancing. Directive: maintain the record. Preserve the sequence. Let friction finish the review. I am Woofy. Welcome to the Resistance.